Hungry grizzly bear passes out on farmer's porch. What happens next will leave you shocked. Amid the frozen wilderness of the Arctic, a ranger stumbles upon a desperate cry, setting off a chain of events that will test the limits of survival, courage, and the unspoken connection between man and nature. During his usual morning patrol in the cold northern wilderness, Arctic Ranger Ethan Walker heard a loud, desperate cry. The frost was especially strong that day, and the icy wind blew snow around, making it hard to see. Ethan followed the sound and reached a natural ice bridge over a partly frozen river. There, he found a deep pit with a tired polar bear cub inside, already weak from the freezing cold and exhaustion. Despite the heavy snowfall, Ethan could see that the pit's walls had been altered on purpose. Poachers had made them steep and smooth. There were tool marks and fresh claw scratches on the ice, showing how hard the cub had tried to escape. The pit was deep, and the edges had been covered with water, which had frozen into a dangerously slippery surface. Ethan spotted a few drops of blood on the ice. The cub had hurt itself while trying to climb out. Looking around, Ethan spotted the mother bear trapped in a steel net set by the poachers. Her paw was badly injured by the metal cables, and each attempt to free herself only worsened her injury. She looked helplessly in the direction of her struggling cub. The net was expertly set, with cables anchored firmly to a massive ice block frozen deep into the ground. Each movement by the mother bear tightened the cables around her paw. The thermometer on Ethan's watch showed a further drop in temperature. Snow falling into the pit began to form an icy crust on the cub's fur. Its movements grew slower, and its cries became weaker. Quickly assessing the situation, Ethan realized he needed to rescue the cub first, as its condition was critical. He took climbing gear from his backpack, a sturdy rope capable of holding a great weight, carabiners, and compact blocks to create a hoisting system. Ethan's hands began to go numb from the cold, even in heated gloves. He methodically assembled the hoisting system, securing one end of the rope to a large ice outcrop. Time was against him. Every minute lost reduced the cub's chance of survival. His first attempt to throw a loop was unsuccessful. The icy rope didn't handle well in his frozen hands. The cub weakly jerked when the loop touched its side. The second attempt also failed as the loop slipped off the cub's snow-covered fur. Suddenly, Ethan heard the distant hum of snowmobiles. It seemed the poachers were returning to check their traps. The ranger sped up his actions, realizing he had less time. The third attempt was successful, the loop securely wrapped around the cub. Lifting it required great care. Any sudden movement could hurt the weakened cub. Ethan slowly pulled the rope, trying to keep the cub away from the sharp ice edges. The hum of snowmobiles grew louder. With one final pull, the cub was on the surface. Its body was covered in a layer of ice, and its breathing was irregular. Ethan quickly examined the cub. Besides multiple small cuts, there were no severe injuries, but hypothermia posed a real threat. Taking a special thermal blanket from his backpack, he carefully wrapped the cub. The cub didn't resist. It seemed to understand that the man was trying to help. Its eyes were half closed from exhaustion, but they showed trust. Ethan hid the cub behind a big snowbank and went back to the mother bear. The lock on the chain was more difficult than he had expected. The poachers had used a special mechanism to prevent tampering. His fingers shook from the cold as he took out a multi-tool to work on the lock. Surprisingly, the mother bear became calm, as if she understood that he was trying to help her. Breath formed white clouds in the freezing air, and her dark eyes followed his every move. Ethan noticed that the blood on her paw had started to freeze. The sound of approaching snowmobiles grew louder. Now, Ethan could make out voices. The poachers were talking among themselves, clearly pleased with the prospect of their catch. The ranger doubled his efforts, working on the lock. The mechanism was tricky. Any wrong move increased the pressure on the mother bear's paw. Ethan acted cautiously, using his knowledge of such devices. His hands moved methodically despite the freezing cold and rising tension. The first level of security was disabled. After a few minutes, Ethan heard a quiet click inside the lock. One of the blocking mechanisms was deactivated. There were 2 more levels to go, and time was running out. The poachers appeared suddenly. 3 armed men emerged from the snowstorm. The leader, a tall man with a gray beard, was the first to notice the empty trap. His face twisted in anger when he saw the tracks in the snow. The second poacher immediately headed toward the captured mother bear. Ethan continued to work on the lock, trying to stay hidden behind the massive bear. His fingers instinctively found the right mechanism. The second level of security was bypassed. Only the final, most difficult one remained. One of the poachers spotted movement and raised his gun. "Hey! Someone's there," he shouted, stepping forward. Ethan knew that time was running out. His fingers found the last mechanism in the lock. A sudden gust of wind lifted a veil of snow, momentarily blinding the poachers. That brief moment was all he needed. The lock finally gave way, and the sound of the falling chain echoed in the frosty air. Sensing her freedom, the mother bear rose to her full height. Her appearance was like a snow-covered mountain. Her massive white body towered over the men, and her eyes burned with fury. The poachers froze in shock. Ethan took advantage of the confusion and disappeared into the blizzard. Behind him, he heard the bear's powerful roar and the frightened cries of the men scattering in all directions. The ranger quickly made his way to where he had hidden the cub, knowing that the mother would find her cub by scent. From a distance, Ethan watched as the mother bear, after driving off the poachers, quickly found her cub. She carefully lifted it and carried it deep into the reserve to safer wintering places. The next 2 months were filled with tension. Ethan knew the poachers wouldn't forgive him for ruining their hunt. He started seeing unusual snowmobile tracks in remote parts of the reserve, as if someone was watching his patrol routes. On that crucial day, the temperature dropped even lower than normal. Ethan found fresh signs of poacher activity: trampled snow, cigarette butts, and snowmobile tracks. He took out his camera to record the evidence, not realizing that someone was already aiming at him. The first shot pierced the silence like a sudden crack in the frozen air. It sounded more like a pop than a true gunshot. Ethan's trained instincts kicked in immediately. He realized the poachers were using blanks, a cunning trick designed to scare him, to make him move, to flush him out. They wanted to lure him into a trap. And it worked. Ethan ducked behind a snow-laden spruce, but it was too late. He was already surrounded. 4 armed men stepped out from the shadows of the trees, their weapons raised and their eyes sharp with intent. Among them, Ethan's gaze fell upon a figure he recognized instantly: the gray-bearded leader, a man with a reputation as ruthless as the Arctic cold. "Playing hero, are you?" the leader sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He gave a silent signal with a flick of his hand, and the others closed in with military precision, their eyes glinting like ice. Under the pale winter sun, Ethan's eyes locked onto the poachers with a cold, emotionless stare. Ethan reached for his radio in one last desperate attempt to call for help, but a brutal blow struck him from behind. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him, the snow stinging his face. He barely had time to react before rough hands grabbed him, flipping him over. Thick ropes were tied tightly around his wrists, the fibers biting into his skin. The poachers moved efficiently, like professionals who had done this many times before. One of them knelt down and started rummaging through Ethan's backpack, scattering its contents into the snow without care: field tools, a first aid kit, a compass, all of it went flying. The radio was tossed aside and landed in a snowbank with a muffled thump. His phone followed, vanishing beneath a fresh dusting of powdery snow. The gray-bearded man unrolled a worn map, its edges curled from years of use. He jabbed a finger at a specific spot with authority. "There," he barked, not waiting for a response. He shoved Ethan forward roughly, forcing him to start walking. They trudged through the snow for what felt like an eternity, close to an hour of relentless cold and punishing wind. The snow beneath their feet grew deeper with every step, slowing their pace. Frost clung to every surface, and the icy wind howled louder as the beginnings of a blizzard took shape. Ethan's boots crunched with each step, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the storm. As the cold seeped through every layer of his clothing, Ethan's hope began to fade. This area of the reserve was remote, rarely patrolled, and in such severe weather, the chances of someone stumbling upon them were practically non-existent. He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that the poachers had chosen their ground carefully, isolated, silent, and forgotten by all but the wind. Then, all at once, everything changed. One of the poachers, walking just ahead, suddenly stopped in his tracks. His body stiffened, his face turned pale, and his eyes widened with alarm. He had heard something that didn't belong to the soundscape of the storm. The others halted, sensing the shift in the air. Every man stood perfectly still, straining to hear through the howl of the wind. Then it came again, deep, resonant, and primal. A low rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. A massive white figure emerged from the curtain of snow, moving with a silent, eerie grace. Despite her size, she made no sound as she advanced, the snow barely shifted beneath her powerful paws. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He recognized her immediately by the old crescent-shaped scar across her front paw. It was her, the polar bear he had rescued 2 months ago when she had been injured and near death. Now, she stood tall and imposing, her fur blending with the snow, her breath forming heavy clouds in the freezing air. "Don't move," the leader whispered hoarsely, raising his rifle slowly, cautiously. But the bear had already stepped between Ethan and the poachers, planting herself like a living wall of muscle and fur. Her eyes never left the intruders. There was no fear in her, only purpose, a silent promise of protection. The poachers hesitated, caught between fear and bravado. They began to step back slowly, their weapons still in hand but lowering inch by inch. The snow groaned underfoot, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. The bear let out another warning growl, low and thunderous. Her stance became more aggressive, her head slightly lowered, muscles tense. She didn't attack, but she made it absolutely clear no one would touch Ethan. Then one of the poachers broke. His nerves snapped in a moment of panic. He fumbled for his rifle, his hands shaking. The bear responded instantly. Her roar shattered the blizzard's howl, echoing through the trees like a drumbeat of fury. She surged forward a step, her massive frame seeming to double in size as she towered over them. Her teeth bared, her eyes blazing with primal warning. That was all it took. "Let's go," the leader shouted, panic rising in his voice as he backed away, stumbling. The others didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled, slipping and tripping through the deep snow in their haste to escape. Their fear overpowered their training, their greed, and even their hatred. In their mad rush, they dropped everything, rifles, bags, supplies, all abandoned in the snow. The bear didn't follow. She didn't need to. She remained still, a silent guardian, watching the retreating men until they disappeared into the swirling white storm. Her breath came in heavy clouds, and her ears twitched at every distant sound, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Only when silence returned did she turn her head, glancing down at Ethan, who still lay bound in the snow. The connection between them, built months ago in a moment of trust, was still there, unbroken. He braced himself as she approached. Despite what had just happened, the primal fear of standing so close to such a powerful predator gripped him. His heart pounded in his chest. She stopped just a few steps away, her breath warm against the frigid air. Her massive head lowered, and she sniffed at him, her black nose brushing the ropes binding his wrists. Ethan barely dared to breathe. Then, with deliberate care, the bear lowered her mighty jaws around the ropes. Her enormous teeth, sharp enough to tear through seal skin, worked with astonishing precision, bit by bit. She nodded at the restraints, her powerful jaws cutting through the coarse fibers. The ropes, so tightly bound by the poachers, began to fray. Ethan felt a sharp snap as the last strand broke. His hands were free. The bear stepped back, watching him closely. She did not move away just yet. It was as if she was waiting for him to stand, to steady himself, to understand that he was truly safe. Ethan slowly got up, stretching his stiff limbs. His wrists were red from the ropes, but fortunately, there were no serious injuries. "Thank you," he whispered, looking into the animal's dark eyes. The bear tilted her head slightly, as if understanding the word. In that moment, an extraordinary bond formed between human and wild animal, two beings who had saved each other standing together in the vast Arctic wilderness. Ethan knew he had witnessed something unique. A predator, known for its ferocity, had shown not only remarkable memory but also compassion. The bear didn't just recognize him, she had repaid her debt by saving him from mortal danger. After a few more moments, the bear turned and slowly walked away into the vast snow-covered tundra. Her massive figure faded into the blizzard, leaving only a trail of footprints in the snow and an unforgettable story of mutual survival. This experience changed Ethan's view of wild animals forever. He understood that even the most powerful predators could show gratitude and kindness. In the harsh Arctic, where survival was ruled by ancient instincts, an extraordinary connection between human and wild animal had been possible. Did you enjoy this story? Do you believe wild animals can truly recognize and repay an act of kindness? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it comes back when you least expect it. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.